Okay, well, Chris, you're ready, and people will continue to join, but I thought I would just welcome all of our ACC Baltimore members. Thank you for joining us for our series on leveraging LinkedIn to advance your career. We are very pleased to have Chris Batts, who is president of the Lion Group, with us today. The Lion Group is a Kansas City-based legal recruiting firm, and they have an extensive network. Chris and a 10-year history, and they recruit across the United States. He also places corporate defense partners, groups, and opens offices for corporate law firms. He also has a podcast called the Law Firm Leadership Podcast, where he interviews general counsel and law firm managing partners and legal consultants on legal industry trends and leadership insights. It's on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. So that's the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. And I'll send that out later so that you have that. Chris has a background in public accounting and is passionate about marketing and strategy. And he has a wealth of experience in the area of how to not only place people, but how to put you into a better position to get that next job yourself. The Lion Group itself is a member of the National Association of Legal Search Consultants and the Sanford Rose Associates, the 9th largest US search firm. Now, I will say that this series of webinars Chris gave it to the Chicago chapter of ACC, and he got rave reviews. In fact, one of our former board members, Ed, I lost his last name now, who moved from Baltimore to the Chicago area, was sure to make note of this and got in touch with Larry Venturelli, our president, and said, you need to do this webinar. So we're thrilled to turn things over to Chris today. Chris, you're on. I'm going to turn off my video, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say today. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, Larry. So appreciate all of you who are setting aside an hour of your time, or for as long as I have you today. A couple things I'll just say in going is, if you can, have a notepad next to you and pen, and depending on how many screens you have, see if you could have your LinkedIn profile up. That'll be productive for you as we spend time today, next Monday and Wednesday as well. So these slides will be available to you at the end. We're also trying to record this to make this available for you as well. And then there is going to be a Q&A session at the end of this. If you do have questions, don't be afraid to submit those through the chat, and I'll get to those towards the end of our time today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Pardon any kind of funky technical things. We're all still trying to figure out how to drive this ship. So let's see, I'm going to do that. And then I get to push that button. All right. So as Lynn said, we were fortunate to work with the Chicago chapter, and there was lots of positive comments. And so delighted to be with you today and share kind of my journey and insights in working with legal executives around the United States. So although we're based in Kansas City, we do work from New York to LA, doing corporate counsel placements all the way to general counsel, and then also law partner groups, office development, things like that for them. So as I mentioned before, today we're going to be talking about LinkedIn profile strategy with principles and formatting. And then also Monday, we're going to be talking about what we have as the 4-step process to LinkedIn visibility, or in essence, the LinkedIn algorithm. And then session 3, for those who feel courageous, you're going to be sharing with Lynn or with me your LinkedIn profiles, and I will spend time live working with each one of you as a group, but individually on your profile, and helping you apply what I'm teaching today, in essence. So be thinking about that if you would like that. When I did it for Chicago, we had 4 people sign up, and I was doing that live for folks. So a little bit again more about me. So I've been recruiting attorneys and attorneys only for 10 years. It's actually a little bit more than that. Started in Houston, Texas, doing partner placements around the United States. And then when I opened my own firm, shortly after getting started in that environment, I was being pulled into corporate environments, placing corporate in-house counsel for folks all over the United States. So um, I am the host of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. It is a legal executive interview and conversation. So have a number of general counsel of public and private companies, have a law school dean, have a former SEC director, have some managing partners, men and women of large law firms around the United States. And we continue to produce more episodes. Recently, I did a 2-part series with the general counsel of Anheuser-Busch. I just released an episode this week with Kristen Stark of Fairfax Associates, who does law firm consulting. So there's general information there. If you haven't already, and if you do enjoy hearing people's stories, being inspired, and learning about what legal executives are running into, I really encourage you to please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on the journey. Also, I actually interview legal tech CEOs, both in the United States, and I had one in Australia. So it's just a fun community of folks talking about current industry legal trends. So I will also say this, you can get it on YouTube. You can also download the transcripts if you like printing and reading and writing on transcripts. We provide a lot of content that way as well. So again, what we're going to be covering today for session 1 is what most people do with their LinkedIn profile. I'll be talking to you about what you typically do, and in essence, what the general group of LinkedIn users do and why it's not effective, and the importance of using formatting, and then understanding how to use formatting and principles to make your profile step out to readers. And again, there's going to be Q&A at the end. Don't be afraid to submit your questions throughout the session, and we'll be able to get to those. I'm sure you'll have plenty. Okay, so first, let's just talk about common profile tendencies that we all do. I've definitely done it in my history, and I've learned to tweak that, and I've learned to coach numerous general counsel, kind of rank and file in corporate legal departments and law firms on best practices. And so in essence, what we do, and some people don't do, but some people kind of resume, cut and paste. Some just throw giant long paragraphs in there. Some people what I call content stacking, which means no spacing whatsoever between your content. There's missing sections. You may not even have an about section, or you might not have your education, or it just might be a very empty profile. And in essence, those are the things that I'm going to try to coach you today on not to do, and you may be doing right now, and then we'll get into what you could be doing. So why not do that? So there is a science to it, and of you who are hiring managers and have seen lots of resumes, you will know what I mean by when you look at a resume, and if you look at 10 of them, you feel like you looked at 100, and you get exhausted, and you start seeing a lot of repeating content that doesn't really stand out, and it starts to blur together, and you're like, I'm done. So we call that eye fatigue, or just in essence, inertia to content. And I don't want that to happen to you. And that's what could happen on your LinkedIn profile. So knowing that probably some of you are wrestling through Zoom fatigue right now, I would call it resume fatigue. And it can happen with your LinkedIn profile. And so it's very important to know that this occurs. And my goal for you today is to learn how to overcome that with formatting and principles to make your content pop, and to make your content readable, and to make your content effective. And and many times resumes are not effective. Most LinkedIn profiles are not effective. And it has a lot to do with understanding that we as humans can get really tired and lazy looking at the same content or the way the content's presented, okay? So again, we want to counteract eye fatigue and inertia. And it's inertia is in our brain. So, you know, there are things that we naturally do as humans where we get just tired from doing. So Zoom is a great example. So what are our goals? Our goals are we want your content easily readable, simple to digest with the eyes and with their mind. We want to make it intuitive, and I'll tell you exactly how to do this. We want to make it attractive to their eyes. Easy on the mind is what I tell people. So we want to reduce that friction that can occur, that inertia to reading. We want to make it inviting, and we want to make it stand out to others. We know, and here's a really critical thing. We want to avoid forcing people to think. And this is web design principles too. So people create websites that reduces inertia because you want people to easily, intuitively search through your content in a way. And so I'm applying those principles to your LinkedIn profile, okay? Okay, so principles first, and then we'll get into formatting. So principles first, context is key. And so really important to remember, if you can walk away from a couple of really important things, which you're gonna get more than just these next moments, but if you can walk away within just the most important content, is use numbers, don't spell out your numbers, use names, or give strong, descriptive, contextual statements, and then further explanations. And I'm gonna just give you, I'll help you understand what I mean by that. So don't just say that you were a lawyer and classic example, you're a public attorney that does corporate M&A, securities, M&A transactions, okay? Where you could give context to that is that I have done over 100 transactions with an aggregate career amount of 10 billion on an average amount of $500,000. And that the math doesn't go well with that. But in essence, when you say that, you give context to your experience. So has most of your transactional experience been public company, private company? Has most of your litigation experience been this practice area with these types of clients? Context is so important. Use numbers because our eyes are attracted to numbers. Use names if you're allowed to, and it's not a confidentiality issue. Give context. Provide descriptions, and I'll help you with that, and I'll explain how. So when we're talking about principles, blog post formatting is a great way to rely on for what works well. Meaning, when you read most blogs these days, the title and the headers or their subheadings really give context, or actually almost gives you the answers in those statements. And you could almost know everything you need to know about the blog by the headers, the main header and the subheadings. And so I want to encourage you to use headers, and we'll talk about that. I want to encourage you to use short sentences or shorter sentences, to use spaces between your content, to use bullet points, but spaces between your bullet points, and to use, where it's appropriate, capitalized words, not words, but capitalized like letters or acronyms, because this is what's going to pop out to readers when they're looking at your LinkedIn profile, okay? I'm going to provide examples for you. So the sections that are really critical that we'll talk about today, 3 sessions is not enough for 3 hours to go over everything LinkedIn. Even from a content standpoint, there's a lot of strategy about LinkedIn, but what I'm going to give you is career pragmatic steps to basically sow into your career as a lawyer that will pay dividends over many years for you. So it's really good stuff. So formatting, about section. We're going to talk about the about section because the about section is the executive summary for your career. The experience section, and we'll touch on professional headline and education sections. That's what we'll cover today. So before we do this, and again, you're going to get these slides, everyone is always concerned about, I don't want everybody to know that I'm updating my profile. I definitely don't want my boss to know. I don't want the world to know. Well, you can go into LinkedIn under your privacy settings, which they make it very easy to do when you log in, and it says share profile changes with your network. Right now, by default, they don't let you do that. You actually have to let them, you actually have to turn on that functionality to let the world know that you're doing this. So just so you know, you can do that. And I also want to let you know that on LinkedIn, of all the platforms out there, LinkedIn has done a phenomenal job with their help section. The help functionality of LinkedIn is really, really good. If you have a question and I didn't answer it today and you want an answer quickly, I really encourage you to go into LinkedIn help and start typing out search terms, and you're going to get some really good articles that will answer for you your questions. I'm very impressed of everything out there, all the tools that we use, and their about section is probably, or their help section is probably one of the best I've ever seen. So want to point you to that if you have additional questions and I don't answer them today or the next 2 sessions, okay? All right, now let's get into formatting. So the about section, everyone has the option to create one, although you may or may not be using it right now. So I want you, if you do have one, that's great. If you don't have one, I want you to go into your LinkedIn profile and log in, and then it'll tell you about what sections you can add. And I really encourage you to add your about. If you're like hesitant and say, I don't want to make that available right now, that's fine. Just write it down on a piece of paper and start scratching out drafts. But here's the formatting you need to do. So I encourage everybody to follow this specific format. First sentence, what is the first thing they see in this about section? Because the about section is at the top. One sentence, not more than one sentence, and it should not be a run-on sentence. Who are you in one sentence? And I'm not saying this is easy, but it's very powerful. You, as executives, as attorneys, your job in-house is to make it simple, pragmatic, and to the point to your business colleagues. And it's very important you know how to communicate succinctly who you are and what you bring to the table, or in summary, who you are to a future employer, to an agency like mine. And so one sentence, and I'll give you an example of that, but in essence, I'm a 10-year public company attorney with a strong background in SEC compliance, corporate M&A, and corporate governance, period. And there's a lot of ways to tweak that, but that's one example. And then what do you do next? You'd put a space. Don't you just start writing a sentence or more sentences. You put a space. Let their brain absorb that. Put a space, and then what you do is you create a header. And I suggest that header should be called core strengths. So here's a challenge for you. And this is what most people don't do, and people who do it will get more traffic from employers, agencies, and just overall traffic in general, because again, why we're doing this is about traffic and visibility on LinkedIn. So I'm going to challenge you to put yourself out there with your core strengths. So header, type in core strengths, space, and then you're going to put 4 to 6 bullet points of what are your core strengths. And what I mean by that is, what are your core strengths of who you present yourself out there to the world to? Again, primarily we're talking about to future employers, to agencies and things like that. Who are you as an attorney, as a professional when you show up every day? So let me give you some examples. It's not just about your skills. It's also, so as I coach people through this, it's not just about who you are as a human doing, but a human being. So employers and my hiring managers and general counsel understand this. They hire for fit, not just what you can do. So are you an executive? Are you a manager? Are you um, are you skilled in a certain industry? Are you skilled in certain practice areas? Um, and then not just on top of that, but from an emotional intelligence standpoint, who are you when you show up every day? And you can include that. So formatting, think of 4 to 6 bullet points with strengths, core strengths, and that's one word or a short phrase with a hyphen and a short description explaining your core strength. And what this looks like is you're actually rolling up your 10, 15, 20, 30 years of experience into these core strengths. Are you you know, a risk management, litigation management expert with 10 years of private practice labor and employment experience, and now you're the global head of labor and employment, and you also have this strength in human resources and not just litigation and risk management. And so when you describe those as strengths, there should be a summary statement. So let's just talk about that. If you were the head of litigation, you should say, there should be some management skills in there. You should maybe oversee a team of, or have overseen teams of 2 to 10. Or maybe you're an executive and you oversee 3 departments, not including legal. Maybe it's compliance, maybe it's HR, maybe it is risk management and you're in insurance. So there are reasons why we want to put a short phrase, because we're helping them think of who you are and how you show up, and then you got to provide a short description of your 30 years, 20, 10 years experience. And then, yeah, and it's important to actually list only 4 to 6. You don't want 20, you don't even want 10, but you want to boil yourself down to know how you show up every day and who you are and what you present yourself, okay? So after you have your 4 to 6, after you have your bullet point 4 to 6 hyphen descriptives, then you need to put, and you want to have spaces between those, then you want to put in a header as career highlights. The longer you've done this, the more you're going to have these one-off things that are really important to talk about. Did you win an award? Was there a big problem you solved, whether it was a case or a transaction that is worth noting? Was there, were you a part of an IPO? Were you acquired and you went through that process? Is there something noteworthy? And so the way I would challenge you with that is put a creative bullet points, and then short phrase to help the mind understand what they're reading, and then put a very brief summary statement. Was a part of a unique IPO transaction, first of its kind. Was a part of a bet the company case, that trial, and we won. It was a jury trial. One, as in someone I work with in Chicago, won Chief Compliance Officer of the Year award. Putting things in there that make sure you make that content stand out. And then after that, you get to put boilerplate content. And it could be simply keywords. So the temptation, and what most resumes are, it's all boilerplate content. There's nothing unique. There's nothing with context in it. There's no numbers. You're not talking about your clients or customers. You're definitely not listing results. And so boilerplate content is, hey, I'm a litigator and I've done all these litigation practice areas. Boilerplate content is, I'm a transactional lawyer and here's all the areas of transactional work I've done. Boilerplate content is, I'm a contracts expert and here's all the areas, both indirect and direct contracts, and how I've dealt with it. That's boilerplate content. That's keyword saturated. You can put that at the bottom of the about section. That's completely fine. But if you really want to stand out to people you're competing with in getting an opportunity, you got to give context. And again, employers are looking for results. It's communicated in numbers and has to be easily understood, not a giant paragraph, because you want to squeeze in every inch of how amazing you did on something. You got to find a way to make it very short and easy to read, okay? Okay. So here's an example down here about, I'm a legal executive in the commercial community bank setting with diverse experience acquired over 15 years, risk management, corporate governance, loan administration, and he lists off his experiences, his strengths in some ways, okay? So as I mentioned before, the about section is your executive summary. The about section should have your history rolled up, specifically after law school, unless you have unique industry experience before you became a lawyer. Were you a programmer? Were you in sales? Were you an engineer? That's something else you can roll into your about section, because that might make you unique and make you stand out from the crowd, okay? All right, so we're getting into this some more, and okay, so what would you describe as your professional core strengths? And I kind of put the core strengths down here as examples. Maybe it's executive leadership, maybe it's management. When you talk about that, so if let's say your core strength is executive leadership or leadership, and you're thinking of, well, how do I describe myself? Ask yourself, or how do people describe you as a leader? And put in some of that emotional intelligence. Put in some of those results. I oversee 3 departments of 300 people total. I manage 20 direct reports and 300 indirect reports. Management might be same kind of concepts. As a manager, I'm, you know, or you could say your leadership, you could put your leadership philosophy. Servant leadership is the buzzword, but helping people understand how you lead is a really powerful way to sell yourself as a leader, especially for general counsel or people who want to be general counsel. People hire leaders, leaders hire leaders, and they're looking for ways for self-awareness to be communicated. And it's very important that's done in the about section, okay? So here's the different areas that are core strengths. And again, employers hire people who've accomplished things. So you got to learn how to communicate your results. They hire people who've solved problems. They've hired people who've completed projects. They've hired people who have had wins or awards or things like that. So finding ways to communicate your results in your career in that about section with the formatting I suggested. Okay. So again, here's examples. About section. That sentence that we talked about, then here we go. Now he didn't put the header in here, but I do recommend you put that header because it helps people think less. Because if you have the sentence here and then you don't have a header, they're going to say, oh, what is this? Why do I see these bullet points in these words? Oh, core strengths. Okay, now I know what I'm reading. So you reduce the friction of them thinking. So, okay, executive management, corporate governance. This guy's great at, contract negotiation, vendor management. And so my recommendation for this person is put in more numbers. He has a little bit of numbers here at the bottom. He's got some things that stand out. So he's got a SAS 70. So there's some compliance things here. General advising. But this is an example of where you want to head. Okay. Now we're going to go to the experience section. Everyone's always got questions about experience. And most people tend to leave that blank. So, or what I tend to see is no about section and content in the experience, or an empty experience section with just titles, and then all of their experience in their about section. So I'm advocating the summary of your experience in the about section, like an executive summary. And then we're going to get into more detail and context. Again, I'm using that word context in your experience because your experience matters. Agencies like mine and employers want to know, what have you done? And not just the boilerplate content. So what happens? So at your current role, let's just talk about your current role for a second. What's the first thing they see? So thinking about formatting, what is your responsibility or what is your role at your current company? First sentence. And we're not looking for a giant paragraph. We know you do a lot, but you gotta basically in one sentence explain what is your role at your company, and then put a space. And then here's the thing that most people don't do, and it's very powerful. Who is your company? I work for Honeywell. We're 50,000 employees. We're a publicly traded company, and da 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 da. And you want to find ways to give context to who your employer is and your previous employers, the law firms you worked for, the companies that people have heard of. Even if you work for Apple, you should still give context to who Apple is. One sentence, but serve the reader, because it's a very powerful thing to name drop. And I encourage you to name drop if you're allowed to do that. One sentence, what is your role? Space. One sentence, who is your employer? Put numbers in, give context to the employer. If it's a publicly traded, give the ticker sign, give how many employees it is, maybe talk about divisions, maybe talk about annual revenue, maybe list out quickly what their lines of business or what industry they're in. Give context to the employer, okay? And when I say one line, it could be two lines, but one sentence, okay? Space, and then header, I recommend highlights. You could call it what you want, but highlights is basically highlighting the things that you've done, your accomplishments in your role right now, and for have you been in this company in that specific role. So problem solved, projects completed, wins. And you could even take the phrase from your core strengths and bring it down. So maybe it was leadership, and maybe you led the growth of your legal department. Maybe you led the transaction of the IPO. Maybe you led the bet the company case I talked about, or some kind of acquisition. But put in there, I encourage you to put in there those core strengths with more descriptive of specific areas where that's addressed. Notice how this will reduce the friction of helping people comprehend who you are and what you can do. Very powerful, because no one does this, and it makes you stand out in a very powerful way. So again, highlights, examples of tangible as much as you can. And I'm gonna give you other tangibles. Describe how big the case is, if you're allowed to. Describe how big the transactions are, or how small, or how many. If say you're a contracts administrator, talk about the volume of contracts you've done. Talk about on an annual basis how many sales contracts you've done. If you are a general counsel, talk about how large your legal department is. Doesn't have to be all lawyers. You don't have to get super descriptive, but help people understand what is your responsibility from a leadership standpoint and from a management standpoint, and different areas of responsibility, okay? And then at the end, you can put boilerplate content that are keyword saturated. Make sure what you put in there as far as bullet points and the stuff I talk about that has spaces. Boilerplate content can be stacked, but everything else needs to have spacing, okay? All right, so I'm gonna give you an example. This is what you don't do. This is what happens. You have a title and no content. We don't know what this person does at Aperio. Ironically, I placed this person here, and she gets an earful when I talk with her. But it's an opportunity. And so what I help people say is use the real estate given to you. Use that space, maximize it. Content is king, okay? Also, what not to do. The chief legal officer at Cisco does not have any content on there. Now, in some ways, if you're at a Fortune 500 and you're a very visible person, you may not need to, but I'll tell you, it's very powerful to do that, even though you're at the stature and at a client like that, because you could be missing on opportunities because people don't know the extent of what you're doing or how you're doing it. So I kind of don't care if you're at Apple or if you're at Walmart. You should still put this in there. Okay, so I'm going to give you some more examples. This is the experience section. Okay, so this person is not doing exactly what I'm recommending, and it's harder to read, but there are some things that are worth noting. So first thing they should see, should not be a bullet point. There shouldn't be like a little dot there. It should be one sentence. And there should be a space, but there are some things that are worth noting. They've got some context in here. So this is also a good friend of mine, and he's at the world's largest operator of family entertainment facilities. He's up in New York. And he describes they have 320 worldwide facilities. They've got 9,500 full-time equivalents. He has done a 10x ROI over 4 years on exit from private equity shop to Comcast. So he helped them do a turnaround from a bankruptcy. And if you get to see his about section, you will notice that the way he describes himself, he sounds more like a CEO than a general counsel. But this is really powerful. Lead attorney and over 100 M&A deals, including M&A Magazine's Deal of the Year. So he's bringing up really good stuff. He's talking about results because he does a lot of work with private equity. Private equity wants to see results. And employers like to see results. Makes you stand out, makes you help people understand what you've done, okay? I would love to see more numbers here. Head of litigation, dispute resolution, over 300 claims. Excellent description, and he brings in some examples of the work that he's overseen, okay? So I would have liked for him to have a single sentence of who he is in his role, space, and explain who his employer is, space, career highlights, and then he can kind of continue talking with these points, okay? So in review, for that experience section, what I just said, first sentence, what was your role, space, who is the employer? It's very powerful to do. And I'll say this too, guys, all your employers listed. Don't do your most recent employer only. Do it from when you left law school, all your law firms, all the companies you were at. Do the exact same formatting. You may not have as much content, but I'll say this, employers care about your foundational training and the examples of cases you touched. It really matters. And you're going to save a recruiter time. You're going to be attractive to more recruiters. You're going to be attractive to more employers if you do that. If you fill in the details with helpful context, okay? I know I'm saying that a lot, but it really matters. Remember to use spacing. Your content's going to be read more often, and it's going to be easily understood, okay? All right, of course, the word today is context. All right, so now we are at that fun phase of Q&A, and it is 12:40. Let's see here. I've got 23 of you. I am going to exit out of here. Oh, okay, the chats are coming in. Great. Okay, hold on a second. So I want to encourage everyone to start submitting questions. If you haven't already, feel free to do that. I'm going to be looking at those questions. So thank you to Lynn and Larry for letting me be a part of your time today, your community. Today's the first of 3 sessions. And I look forward to continuing to share insights that I share with general counsel and law partners around the United States constantly. So feel free to ask questions. So I do have a question that was sent privately to me, and it is, and you guys are welcome to share them publicly, although if you only share private, that's completely okay too. So I'm going to address one question. The LinkedIn algorithm continues to suggest my work colleagues as connections, which I do not want. Is there a way to turn off this suggestion function? That's a great question. I would say yes. There are ways to do that. I would encourage you to go into privacy settings and learn and get exposed to those settings. In our next session, I'll probably be able to show you a little bit more about that or speak to that. But I encourage you to go into. Actually, I encourage you to go into help and ask that question. But yeah, the suggestion functionality can change, and you can modify that based on your desire. So the answer is yes. Okay, so someone asked, if you have a more relevant degrees than just a JD, what is the best way to highlight that? That's a great question. So if those give you like an MBA, if those are other kinds of qualifications that are meant to be acronyms on your name, you can put that in your name or put that in your professional headline. You can also add that to your education section. We didn't talk about education, but don't be afraid to describe yourself and your interests in your education and talk about your experience while you were in law school or in getting your MBA or other degrees you're getting, your LLM if that's applicable. Um, uh, my rule of thumb for folks is if there's available real estate space to type in content, make sure it's readable, make sure there's lots of spacing, but it's an area for you to kind of emphasize. You can do that. Let me see here. Okay, great. So someone said maybe you have less experience and don't have a lot of wins and awards yet. That's completely okay. You don't, so wins and awards are there for those when it's relevant. For career highlights, if you don't have like a ton of career history, then you don't need to even have the header for career highlights yet. That's kind of for folks maybe at 10, 15 years experience or more. If you're in a law firm, you get a ton of experience and maybe worked on some significant matters that are worth noting, then maybe that might be worth it. But I actually wouldn't even worry about it as say a junior lawyer, okay? If you have a long history at one company, how is it that is handled differently with multiple employers? How is that handled differently with multiples? Okay, so there's a couple of ways to handle. So if you're at a company for a long time and you had a lot of different titles as you're promoted within, you can do it two different ways. You can set it up as like what I showed, the gentleman at Cisco that had his whole career at Cisco under one experience section. And then what I recommend for that person is to put the first line for each role as what was their role there. Maybe the top one, maybe their last role includes the description of who Cisco is in a very brief statement. But then under that, you don't have to do that every time for each role, obviously, but under each role in there, I would still put like role highlights or something that gives you a chance to bring visibility to that. Another way you can do that is if it's one employer, what you could do is create a new experience section for each individual role. And that'll give you more spacing, because what LinkedIn does is it kind of accordions it, kind of like a slinky, and it shrinks it. And so it's harder to read that content if it's all crammed and you were there at 30 years or 20 years or even 10 years and you did a bunch of stuff. So you could create individual experience sections for each one of your roles at each company. But if you're at a lot of employers, meaning like 4 or 5 or more, I would keep your multiple roles within one experience section per employer, if that makes sense. Okay, I hope that helps. How universal is recruiters' use of LinkedIn? What other platforms do you find valuable? How do you use it? Gosh, okay. So someone asked about how universal, and LinkedIn is the single most powerful platform for recruiters to find professionals. We don't find you anywhere else. There are services for us that buy lists, and we have a service that we use called Leopard Solutions. It's the top in the industry for finding lawyers. But in all honesty, there's no other platform that's really that useful. Now, I'll take that back. There's other places, such as the Bar Association, sometimes is more visible. If you're a private practice, there's the popularity like contests like Super Lawyers, Chambers and Partners, but that's for private practice attorneys if you're on those platforms and were mentioned or noticed. Martindale Hubbell. But in-house lawyers, LinkedIn is the single most important platform for you. I would not bother anywhere else, to be honest. Do a good job putting as much content for yourself on your bar associations. I do recommend that. But your LinkedIn profile is as critical as your resume, and I would actually say it's more important. You can't not give time to your resume, but you should give way more time and way more investment to your LinkedIn profile. It will pay outrageous dividends for you if you do what I recommend. Okay, thoughts on the headline under your name. I think LinkedIn typically fills this in with your title. That's correct. Now, that headline under your name on LinkedIn is really powerful. And I want to recommend a couple things for you when it comes to that. Don't be afraid to put your title. Don't put a title in there that is not relevant. It's very dangerous and can look bad for you. So if you want to be a general counsel and you don't have general counsel experience, don't put it there. I don't even recommend putting, if you were a true general counsel, you could put general counsel in there. You could put legal executive in there. You could also describe what kind of lawyer you are or where your expertise lies. So public company attorney is a powerful one. Corporate M&A attorney, securities attorney, a litigator, trial lawyer. You could put you could put some of your skills from a soft skill standpoint, personality traits in there. You could put hungry. I mean, there's different things you could think about. That deal lawyer. It's kind of driven by personality. It's driven by preference. Um, you could put where you're employed. You could put like general counsel of Fortune 500s, if that's true. Um, uh, but it's a useful thing to put in. You could put in, excuse me, you could put in acronyms if they're not already there professionally. So I hope that helps. Okay, how do you determine keywords that will allow you to pop out? So I can actually do a session on that alone. The quickest way to find out how to put keywords in is and find out what keywords to use is actually go to the search bar function on LinkedIn and type in keywords and see how often those keywords are used. If you type in a word like litigator versus or a classic one is like attorney over lawyer. Which one gets more search results? Sometimes you should use the one that gets less search results because you'll stand up quicker. If you use the keyword, and so say like you have a skill that can be phrased a couple different ways. Find out which one gets less traffic, and you might get more traffic from using the keyword that's not used as often. There are some general keywords you should use. So if you're a general counsel, you should definitely use general counsel. There's some other ironies. Let's say you're an associate general counsel or assistant general counsel. You get the benefit of having general counsel in the phrase of assistant or associate general counsel. And so you'll pop up often, even for just general counsel searches. So keywords are funny. LinkedIn doesn't give as much credence to keywords, but it's still very important. But it's not, you can't game the system as much as you used to with LinkedIn. And if you did try to game it, they'll kick you off pretty quickly, or not kick you, but they'll punish you in different ways. Let's see here. Should we apply the same tips to your resume? That's a great question. My answer is yes. I find that most resumes are garbage. I find most resumes are God paragraphs that are unreadable and have a lot of missing context to it. Should you give context to your wins and to your employers and to your transactions and your litigation cases and your experience? Yes, you should. And if you don't, you should. You should put numbers in there. You should put summary statements. You should use more bullet points. You should make it more readable. You should find ways to make your content pop. You can do that with bolding. You can do that with italics. I've seen people put, I was at XYZ law firm, and in italics under it, they have a one sentence summary of who the law firm is. So powerful. I've seen bolding, italics, and just regular font, and it just makes content stand out. I would suggest putting core strengths in your resume. I suggest rolling up all your experience. So yes, absolutely. And I'm finding that people are starting to do that, and I think it's a very powerful thing. There's more ways of doing that. Let me just say this for right now. We don't do that work as a recruiter. We are not really in the career consultant space on that level. We serve employers and we place law partners. So as a general advertisement, if you're looking to hire attorneys, we'd love to help you. But if you're going to say, hey, Chris, can you do this for me? We're not going to do that. We'll refer you. And then I offer some of my coaching services for free. I offer for free for clients who eventually want to talk to us about recruiting. So I hope that helps, guys. Let's see here. I was a software program architect for 10 years, and now I'm a GC at a software company. I believe this makes me a better at my current job, but mostly in the software industry. How do I highlight both strengths? Very good. I've worked with lots of attorneys like that. In your core strengths, you need to emphasize your software engineering background. You need to emphasize your tech background. Um, and it's important, guys. So here's a important thing to take away. Don't be afraid to be very specific about who you are and what you bring to the table. If you're broad, and when people just put out there that they're an XYZ attorney with not a lot of context, and you're very broad on your descriptions, you're not going to attract a whole lot. But when you get more specific, you help rule out people that are a waste of your time. And don't be nervous about putting yourself out there in a specific way. Now, if you're like, hey, Chris, I was in retail forever and that industry is getting hammered, and I want to be available to other industries, it makes complete sense. You don't have to say that retail is a core strength and you want to be in that, but you may want to say that you were maybe more functional skills versus industry expertise in that way. Okay. So for the software programmer, uh, core strengths, definitely put that in there. Um, Definitely emphasize. Now, in your career highlights, I would say I was a software programmer and this is what we did and here's a win and this is why I'm a real strength to the next software company or to the next Internet of Things or whatever it might be, hardware, software related. And I would put that software programmer or description of that or something that describes you in your professional headline. That's a very powerful thing. When you have if you have an industry expertise or if you have a non-legal expertise you bring to the table, sales or business development or operational management, don't be afraid to put that in there in your professional headline. It's a very powerful thing, okay? Does corporate generalist sound too vague? Corporate generalist doesn't have to sound vague if you provide appropriate descriptions to what that means. As a rule of thumb, all in-house attorneys should be corporate generalists. I don't care if you're IP, I don't care if you're a litigator, I don't care if you're in privacy, you're touching contracts, and you have a general knowledge of what attorneys should do on an in-house basis. Even if you're specialists, there's corporate generalists. Um, if you use the word or the phrase corporate generalist as a core strength, you got to give context to what you mean. So if you just throw it out there, yeah, it's going to be hard to understand what you mean by that. So um, what's the rule of thumb on how often you should be reviewing your profile and updating it? That's a great question. So, uh, so the answer to the question is now. You should be doing it now. You should not update your profile after after you leave a company, after you've been downsized, let go, all that stuff. You need to do it now, and you should do it on a quarterly, semi-annual, or annual basis. So at a minimum annually or more frequently. Um, and you should not wait till an event necessitates it. You should stay on top of it. Any tips for showing transferable skills from public sector to private sector? That's a great question. I'm going to give you a public sector example. I have a corporation right now that's a Fortune 500, a phenomenal brand that's hiring a senior litigation counsel. And that person told me to find an AUSA attorney or a U.S. office, U.S. Assistant Attorney Office. I'm getting that mixed up. So a DOJ attorney. Um, and so they're working for the government, defending agencies. And he already knew, the general counsel already knew that they had transferable skills to this strategy role for corporate litigation. And so there's lots of ways to transfer your public sector experience. And it could be leadership, it could be management, it could be contracts, it could be soft skills around those areas. If you're a litigator, it's understanding litigation management, it's understanding strategy, it's demonstrating your successes in those. It's kind of all of those areas. And if it's specific agency work like FDA from a federal level or from a state level. It kind of depends. I talked to your local recruiter about that to get more detail. I would also talk to people who've done it to either see what they've done in their LinkedIn profile or discuss that with them. That happens all the time. So yes, there's a lot of that that could occur for you, okay? Let me see if I missed anything. Things can pop in here. I know I'm talking really fast, so please forgive me. Any other questions? Any other questions? You guys have been rock stars, hanging on. Such a delight to work with you. Okay, where do I put my 12 speaking engagements and panel discussions for 2 decades of practice? Great question. LinkedIn has done a really good job at providing opportunities for you to do that. So to that person who mentioned that, and to those of you who are writers, publishers, and speakers for events or whatever, go into LinkedIn and find the section. So if you go to your LinkedIn profile and you're logged in, there is a place where it invites you to say, add this section, or find a way to edit your profile area, and you're gonna have a laundry list of things that you can add. Sections you can add. You can add more content to your education. You can add lots of different additional sections you didn't know existed. You can move those sections around on your LinkedIn profile too. I'm not a big proponent to change the default method of where you put sections. So, excuse me, another thing to think about too is, say you're in your About section and you're under the edit function, you can actually add links to articles written. You can add links to, say, YouTube videos that were created or interviews of you. Excuse me. You can add a PDF document if you wanted, and you can do that under each one of your experience sections. That's also very powerful. Yeah, other questions? These are good questions. Okay. All right, so in closing, I really do hope to see all of you. If you're able to meet me on Monday next week, and we're gonna go over the 4 steps of LinkedIn visibility. And it's gonna take everything I've said to a whole new level, and I'm gonna give you practical tips on what to do with LinkedIn and not just your LinkedIn profile. And it's not time consuming, it's very doable, and it's gonna transform the way you use this platform, okay? So kind of in going, visit our website. We'd love to